Okay, now we're ready to add the camera to our application. So I've got my home screen open, and over on the right side I've got my actual iPhone streaming. The reason for that is because you can't use the camera in a simulator, so you need to use an actual device. In the home screen we're going to import a few components. First let's import Expo from Expo, and then we will import Expo 3 and 3 from Expo 3. And we will also import Expo graphics from Expo graphics. And you should recognize these as the packages that we installed when we first created the application. Now down here, instead of rendering the text home screen, we're going to return an Expo graphics.view, which is what the component that allows us to use the device's camera and gives us some augmented reality capabilities. So let's give it a style of flex1, and we need to set a few properties on this to get it working. The first one is onContextCreate, and this is just a function that gets called as soon as the graphics context is created. So let's assign that to this.onContextCreate, which is a function that we haven't defined yet, but we'll do in just a second. We also need to set the onRender function, which is a function that gets called every time the graphics scene is rendered. So we'll say this.onRender. And finally, to enable it for augmented reality, we need to set AR enabled equal to true. And we'll come up here and add our functions. OnContextCreate, we're going to make that an async function, and it takes quite a few arguments. One of them is GL, which is a reference to the graphics. It takes scale, width, height, and the AR session information. OnRender takes a single argument called delta, which is the time difference since the last time the render method was called. So let's save that and make sure we don't get any errors. And it's reloading over here on my phone. While that's loading, you need to do a few things to get the Three.js scene set up. You need to basically have a renderer, a scene, and a camera. And so we'll do that in the onContextCreate. So first let's put a little comment that says initialize renderer, and we're going to create a variable called this.renderer, and we're going to set it equal to an expo3.create renderer. And what that does is it takes a GL context and gives you a renderer back. We also need to set the pixel ratio to the scale, and that just helps us with some sizing constraints. And you also need to set the size itself with the given width and a height. If you don't call these last two things, it'll look a little bit weird. Okay, next we should initialize the scene. So we'll put a comment there that that's what we're doing, and we're going to create this.scene, and that's going to be equal to a new 3.scene. And we want to set the background of the scene to the actual augmented reality session, which is the camera with whatever types of graphics we put inside of it. So we'll say this equals expo3.create AR background texture, and we give it the AR session as well as the renderer that we just created. And finally, we need to initialize our camera. So we'll say this initialize camera, and we'll create a variable called this.camera. That equals expo3.create AR camera, and that also takes the AR session, and some of these scaling arguments, you can just copy this. I don't actually fully understand what it does, but there's some documentation on Three.js's website that explains what these numbers all mean. And finally, in our render method, all we want to do now is say this.render.render, and we give it the scene and the camera. And if we save that and run it, we should have an AR session running in our application. We'll test it in just a second. All right, so I'll hold this up. You can see there's my desk, and this is looking through the camera of my phone. So we have the camera and everything working. We've also got a whole bunch of errors down here in these yellow boxes, and they're a little obnoxious, so I'm going to show you how to get rid of them temporarily. Sometimes you do want those boxes on there because they can give you some useful information, but in this case, there's not much we can do about a lot of these. So if we just set console.disable yellow box equal to true, then those boxes will no longer appear. And let's just run it and double check. And it's nice to have them not on there because we'll be looking into the camera a lot and they just obscure the view. All right, so holding it up again, and as you can see, there's no more yellow boxes.